If you've ever felt weighed down by the burdens of life, but you sensed that things didn't need to be that way, or that maybe there was a simpler, happier, more joyful way to live, you're in the right place. Welcome to Two Guys Talk Heart. I'm Stuart Hayes.
I'm Steve Ray, and we're here again to
We
talk
are.
about the heart.
We are.
And it's a good topic.
It's
today.
a great topic.
Very exciting.
So we are actually talking about exactly that concept of if you're feeling weighed down by something, but you sense there's another way to live, then what do you do about it? And how do you, I guess, let your heart help you have positive feelings when you might feel overwhelmed, or you might feel stressed, or you might feel negative feelings?
Yeah, I like this because it's kind of a nice segue from where we were last time, talking about how do you true to your heart. And often when we're not in a kind of an overwhelmed state, it's much easier for us to say, oh no, I need to be, take a more positive view on this, or I need to not kind of follow my old patterns. But sometimes we are in these situations where we feel quite burdened, and there's a lot going on in our life. And the risk always in those situations is that the burden becomes a heavier thing, because in a sense we feel it so strongly through our whole being, and we keep looking at it. That's the real thing. We, in a sense, follow these different emotions that are happening, and it feeds into the worry, the fear, whatever, anxiety, all of that, and it can actually compress even more these emotions, and of course our heart gets kind of squashed in the process. So we kind of get wound down. Our heart has less capacity to help us in those times.
Yeah, and for me, I noticed that that concept of those, what I'd call negative emotions, right? Yeah. So if I'm going to put some vocabulary to them, there's a very broad range, actually. So some very ridiculously strong negative emotions at one end, and then some that are at the other end. They start off as being quite minor, So you might just be a little bit uncomfortable, or or maybe there's a looming deadline with work, So I have perhaps for me a little bit of an underlying level of anxiety that's just very minor, but it starts to build, and a domino effect could happen, right?
And you're on the slippery slope before you know it.
Exactly.
You're kind of focusing more and more, how am I going to do that, and what happens if, and you're kind of being drawn away from your heart in a sense, because there's a sense that if I don't do this, then things could go wrong. So we're driven in that moment by the old fight flight. The fear is the thing that's directing us instead of our heart. So it's very counterintuitive and a real leap of faith.
Oh yeah.
To do the other and say, actually, I'm going to stop that.
But it's funny, the concept. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about if I was to say, Steve, so what's the difference between, the positive, true heart feelings versus negative emotional feelings?
Yeah.
Right? Because when someone says feelings, how do you feel?
Yeah.
That can be a complete scale. But what's the difference? How
Well,
would you describe that?
it's a wonderful question, because I think that's at the core of how we get very confused about feelings, emotions when we're in our heart, when we're not in our heart. You shouldn't be in your heart. You could get exposed. All of those kind of concepts come up because often we talk about being emotional, which covers the whole range of things, from those emotions that will actually close our hearts, right through to the feelings which could open our heart. We just call it, that's the emotional landscape in a way. So it's good for the purpose, as you say, in terms of vocabulary, to talk about the emotions that will really close our heart versus the true heart feelings, i.e. those beautiful feelings that come from our heart. The emotions are driven by thought, and as we start thinking about those things, there's a whole kind of physiology, patterns within us that start driving hormones and all that kind of stuff, and they then pull us into, like you say, maybe some quite light but slippery slope emotions, anxiety, maybe a little bit of worry, and then before you know it, you've got the situation snowballing, and you could be into, terror or deep anger, And once you're in that place, in a way, you've turned your back on your heart and the resource that could actually get you out of that. And you're really dependent on these reactive and very self-protective mechanisms within us, meaning you protect yourself. So your ability to kind of be more, collaborative, if you like, it's just completely shut down.
But that's actually fascinating. So during the week, had a look at a video by the Dalai Lama, actually. So this Dalai Lama video jumped out for me. He was talking about compassion, and what he talked about was actually right on this topic. So the concept that that we are, as humans, are very social. Okay, so much like bees or ants or anything, we are sort of originally we are designed to work in groups, and as we've explored in the past, our heart sort of naturally wants to share and collaborate and connect. Right.
Yeah.
So Dalai Lama was observing in this video that actually that negative emotions arise when we are being self-centered, so self-directed, and therefore, if our motive in doing something is for self-gain, then what happens is that it can lead to feelings of anger or resentment or a feeling that you've been, hardly done by. There's a comparison between. I'm trying to do this activity to get this goal for me. Therefore, anything that's in my way could be a block, could lead to a negative feeling, right?
Yes.
Whereas the compassionate heart leads necessarily to an open heart, because if you're being compassionate, then you are connecting, you are sharing, you're doing something for a wider gain, for a holistic gain. So
And just, as you're talking, that whole thing of you're opening yourself to the resources of others as well. So as soon as you focus on yourself, well, you're reducing the amount of resources, because no one's going to be able to join you in that, because you're actually pushing them away, and they don't kind of want to, support you in that sense, because it's, you're self-focused, unless they have a compassionate heart. Because when you have a compassionate heart, there's a part of you, and I love this definition of compassion, it's like you have the ability to see yourself in another person's situation, no matter what that kind of suffering is or what pain that is. So it might be the pain of someone in deep grief, but on the other hand, it could be the pain of somebody who's incredibly angry, and they might be angry at you. Now, a compassionate heart will see whatever it is and can really...
Quite important, because, if you look at the definition of compassion, right, so compassion is all about sharing the suffering, right?
Yes.
But actually, what you're saying is, it's not about sharing the suffering as in getting
into the suffering,
dragged into the suffering, but actually it's, I guess, being with someone or connecting with them in a way that you're acknowledging that there is suffering for them in some way. And you're not validating the suffering, and you're not going with them into the suffering or anything like that. And when I talk about suffering, this can be, you're busy at work, or you've got the sniffles, It doesn't need to be the weight of the world.
Well, that's right. I mean, it's and I love that definition of suffering, because I think when you talk about, it's suffer is in that word compassion, but it's the with. You are with the person in their pain, but how are you with them? They're in the kind of the quicksand of their emotions, in that, completely lost in it. They're almost beyond help. And our role is not to jump into the quicksand with them and thrash about with them, but often you see that happen. When people see somebody suffering, they actually go into the emotion with them, thinking, that's where I need to be. And, some definitions around empathy actually, that's what people have conceptually, that they need to be in there going, and really connecting in that way. But once you're both in the quicksand, you can't do anything. But whereas if you're on the outside and you're seeing the person in their suffering state, and you're actually able, with an open heart, to reach through to that person, then you can be of support to them. And so that's why I love that quicksand, metaphor, because to me it's like, well, hand them a stick, stay safe, hand them a stick and help them out, not in any kind of patronising way, but you're actually saying, gosh, that sounds shocking. Now, if I say that from my heart, it's so different from saying, oh, that's terrible. That's me then following the emotion. But if I say, wow, that sounds hard, but it's coming from a place of care, it's very different.
Well, it's funny, but I think that for me, when I look at that sort of context and that story, that unknowingly, a very large number of people in the population that I've certainly come across in the workplace, in family life, in friend, in everything, there's almost this unfortunate victim mentality that comes through the way they are trying to empathise, and be compassionate. So, so what I'm talking about is that if I am with you and you're going through a hard time, for me to connect with you from my heart and just let you know that I'm here is very different to almost the victim version of that, which is, well, of course, because life is so hard and you're so overwhelmed, and that's the way it is, which is actually very different, right? But when you allow your heart to be the director of your response to someone when they're in pain, in suffering, if they're overwhelmed, whatever, it's actually extraordinarily different.
Absolutely.
It's funny enough, it just reminded me of, so when I worked in Thailand, their culture was one where that was the way that they were, not the victim way, but they're there to support you. So the classic example was that, so I was doing this project with the World Bank and the IMF, and Thailand was in crisis, and we were in this little bubble of people, and we had to work exceptionally long hours, as in you're in the office at 7 a.m. and you leave the office at 1 a.m. sort of thing. And what we found was that our Thai staff, they didn't need to be there that long. But they felt, because of their culture, that if we were there, they wanted to be there with us, right? So they would just be there. They'd share a meal. They'd come around. They'd rub your shoulders. They'd have a chat, and all this sort of stuff. And we had no way at that stage of life for anything from a Western culture of processing this. We just didn't get that. That's what they were trying to do, just to be there. Not to get dragged into it, but actually just to be there to support. Right?
And what a positive place they're supporting it from. It's like, well, you've got to do this work, but at least you could be, kind of totally with it. And so often in those situations, like, oh, I don't want to be here. So you're not actually wholehearted about your work, because you're just thinking there's all that resentments come in, which again goes back to the negative emotions that can creep in and just really cut off. It's like you're strangled from being able to live life fully. And that's the problem with being burdened by emotions. But because it's so often the way, it's become a normal. Like you say, life is such a burden. Life is suffering. Well, it's not. There is lots of suffering out there. Yeah, that's right. It's not. We experience a lot of suffering. We see a lot of suffering. And I think there's a problem there that we feel like we can't give ourselves permission not to. Like, who am I to be feeling great right now, knowing all of the suffering that's happening out there? It's almost like we think, oh, I better not be, because that wouldn't be fair on those people, as if that's helping them in some way.
It comes through in, if you everyday vernacular, you meet someone and you say, how are you? And they go, not bad,
Yes, that's right. We define it in those
such a confusing response, really, because not bad, what does that mean? You're not bad. You're not good. Are you dead? But,
or the classic one is now busy. So we define ourselves by how much activity we're doing, forgetting that we're human beings. Wow, that's a good question. How am I? If somebody actually did that, people go, no, I didn't actually want that story. I just want the pat response that everyone...
Well, the other one that I get is, if someone will say, oh, there's no point complaining, because no one listens.
That's right.
Really?
Well, there's a guy down at this local cafe, and he is fantastic. He has some incredible things. I went in there one day and I was talking to his wife, who owns the cafe, and she was telling me, oh, yeah, Mick's had a shocking day. The truck broke down, and then, he got this fine, and then there was, it was like... shocking stuff, like not first world problems in a sense, but actually it really affected the business. And when I saw him later in the day, I said, Mick, how are you going? He goes, another day in paradise. Didn't go exactly to plan, but another day. And that's how he always answers. It's another day in paradise. and he's always got a
that.
beam on his face. And really what he's done, he's just chosen to say, I'm happy. Stuff might be going on, but I am fundamentally, to my core, I'm happy. And he must have at some point realised, gee whiz, I am. This is good. Life is good to me. Why should I tell another story or buy into the story of society? And the media is constantly, you know, you hear the news, it's all about what's not working.
Yeah.
And I think this also goes back to the human condition of needing a problem to fix. Where's the problem in that person I'm talking to now? What's going wrong with you so I can fix you in some way? Either just being in your problem or making some suggestion to the problem that you must have. So if a person doesn't offer up a problem, we're kind of looking for it. There must be a problem there somewhere.
But the funny thing is that that's actually exactly what compassion, in both ways, the right way or the other way, you know, is a person's trying to reach in, you know, oh, you've got a problem, but they're going, you know, when you go down it the wrong way by buying into the negative emotion, it's not necessarily helping. And what I love about that story that you mentioned of Nick, whoever Nick is actually, there is so much research, you know, around how if we just decide we're happy, if we decide to say we're positive, that has this positive ripple effect all through us, right? Leaving aside when you take the more powerful step of allowing the positive feelings from your heart to expand and wipe out negative emotions, right? And that's sort of a place we did start this conversation to some degree. And so say someone is overwhelmed right now and they're watching this show and they've seen how we started before we went off on our little tiki tour of talking about different things. What could they do that would help them feel differently, you know, to accept perhaps, or to feel grateful, or to feel joyful even, heaven forbid, you know, instead of feeling overwhelmed and burdened. You know.
Look, and we've done this in at least 2 of the episodes. They have to stop. You do have to, I think, because the habit is so strong within us, you have to stop, and you can't do anything. You actually have to stop, because it's the doing and looking for some way of, how can I do this differently, that actually keeps perpetuating it. It'll be another strategy, another technique to help us get out of the problem. But if we counterintuitively stop all of that busyness and activity, put our feet on the floor, just say, I'm in my head. That's what's causing this problem. I've allowed my thoughts to escalate to a speed that has now got me in this cycle where the hormones are pumping through my body, telling me there's a saber-toothed tiger, when that's not the case, you know. So I need to override my physiology. We are trapped in our evolutionary physiology, as we've talked about, and this is the emerging consciousness of realising that actually we can, if we allow ourselves to have our heart open for us, because that is the thing. It's that how we designed. We're designed to share, as the Dalai Lama was talking about, from the heart. So we have to connect with our heart, and we have to realise, well, I'm not connected there. So that grounding, you know, the putting the hand on the heart, the closing the eyes, the just allowing yourself to be in that heart space. You know, even just doing that, you're breathing. You can feel yourself stop holding your breathing, you know, and it's very quick. And then once you're there, you know, it might just take a minute, and okay, you're a little bit more here and now aware. Your narrow tunnel vision's opened up. More resources are available to you to make the next step, which might be, I'm not going to do that because that's not helping me at the moment, that task or whatever. I'm going to try something else, you know.
It sort of gets to that, what we were talking about in the last episode about following your feeling. And, you know, that when you can surrender your attachment to the feeling within you that you need to do something in a certain way, or you need to feel something in a certain way. So you should feel, for example, you might feel that you should feel overwhelmed or angry.
Yeah.
You know.
Or you feel justified. That person has done something to you, cut you off in the traffic or whatever. You feel very justified in your anger, and they need to know that you're angry. So you might go down and wind your window down and yell at them because they deserve it. Little do we realise that we're just adding to our burden in that moment, let alone that person's. but there's a little part of it that says, I'm happy to take that hit for me and actually feel more burdened as long as that person feels burdened as well. It's a very strange part of it.
That's a great example, you know, that whole concept of people. Well, we started this conversation, we talked about how sometimes there can be a small little feeling of dissatisfaction that can snowball into something else, right?
Yeah.
So what happens, I'll give you an example, we might have talked about this on another show, but I don't know actually. I remember talking about it to someone recently. So I had to go see a client, and I was going to be there for quite a while. So I said, "Have you guys got a car park?" They said, "Yeah, come into just drive below our building," and they ushered me into this car park. Right?
Yeah.
So I get into the car park, and the guy, you know, and I go up and start having meetings with these people, and then about 3 hours later, get this phone call. You know, Stuart, can you come and move your car, right? Because and the reason is that car park that we asked you to be in is not actually one of our car parks from our business. It's someone else's, right? So, you know, anyway, so I go down there, and so this guy had, the person whose car park it actually was, had parked their car across the back of mine, so I couldn't actually leave. And I needed to ring them to say, you know, terribly sorry for inconvenience. Can you know, maybe come and move your car now, and I'll move. Anyway, I was feeling genuinely apologetic. I'd erroneously, you know, been in this position, and you know, wanted to apologise and sort of connect from my heart, so that I could sort of, you know, let him know that, sorry, mate, you know. Anyway, this guy, he had the other attachment, if you like,
to the car.
He had the attachment to feeling aggrieved, and to feeling angry, and to making sure that I knew that my behaviour was utterly unacceptable, and that it had caused such a domino of unnecessary hardship in the planet. You know, so he came out and he wouldn't look me in the eye, and he got in his car and he slammed it and he revved it and he, you know, off he went. And it actually led me to feeling, gee, you know, how did he get to that point, you know, in the day? And I felt very sympathetic, maybe compassionate's probably a better word, because I could feel that his behaviour to me wasn't something that had just evolved because of my act. There was this whole sequence of things that it must have happened. You know. For how long, I don't know, possibly years. You know, but this is just an example of a person on edge, who I hope is watching the show right now. I hope you are. Because
that's
for him,
that's that describing that kind of the insanity of that is that wonderful quote I saw somewhere where, you know, it's a bit like drinking poison and hoping the other person will die, because you're causing so much pain to yourself in the process of thinking that that's somehow affecting that other person, but actually, you know, it's probably not affecting them anywhere near how it's affecting you. And we've got to then ask ourselves, you know, we've got to get back to the fact that we really have to make sure that we are, as much as possible, staying in our heart. Now, there are going to be situations that come up that, of course, make it very difficult for us to be there. And I don't want people to feel like, oh, it's all very well, you know, you say talking about being in your heart, you don't have the hardship that I have. And there are people who have incredible hardship in their life. And so this is really what we're talking about. When you're in that place where you kind of feel like you're down, you know, very deep, and it's the idea of the heart even being there seems, you know, beyond reach. I think it's that thing of your way out has to be step by step. You aren't going to, you know, do one thing and suddenly feel, you know, amazingly happy and or peaceful, calm, whatever it is. It's got to be a step by step thing, and I think that's where gratitude is a really important part of the thing. You know, it might be one little thing that just makes you feel just that tiny bit better, and if you can stop in that moment and really sit with the gratitude of whatever that thing is. It might be, you know, sun on the leaf of a plant. It might be just the taste of some food after you've been really sick and you haven't tasted food for a long time. Whatever it is, sit with it. Sit with it and notice it. And this is about the tuning in that we're trying to do to that very subtle, you know how we were talking about before, just how subtle, how gentle this is. It's not going to be, you know, you know, celebration and lightning and all. It's going to be very gentle and quiet, and that's what we have to. And as soon as we start doing that, then it starts to grow stronger. It's exactly what happens with our heart.
It's a very good thing to think about, actually. So, I mean, if you think about what are the very practical things that someone could do if they're feeling overwhelmed, right? And sometimes being grateful is really hard. Right? And I mean, the best ultimately is when the person can feel grateful for the very thing that is pushing their buttons, right? or the problem. But to start with, finding some gratitude in, gee whiz, it's great just to sit outside to breathe in some fresh air, or to feel the sun on your back, for example, or in your face. In that case, right? Yeah. Another one is another very simple practical step is to forgive, right? So realizing that forgiveness is actually the step of letting go of your attachment to the anger or the disappointment or whatever, so you can move on, right? So in the case of the car park thing, right? So here's me. I'm the person who has blocked off this guy from his car park, right? So, but because I had blocked him off, he was the victim that was suffering. Right? So the best thing that for him really is to forgive me, even though he's put out, right? Yeah. And even though it's led to whatever has happened for him that day, for that guy, whoever he was, if he could have forgiven me for my selfishness or whatever he felt that I'd been, that would have allowed him to have let go of the attachment to all that, his response.
And I think, but the difficulty with that, of course, is that forgiveness has to come from the heart. So he's a long way from his heart. So even if he was just able to realise that in the moment, that would be a start, and say, you know what? What I realise is I can't forgive you, but I do realise I need to forgive you.
Well,
and it's often, a few stages back. But for some people, that's, it's not even in their worldview. That idea of forgiveness being something that's either good for them or for the other person. I mean, I think it's really interesting because for me, that whole thing around compassion is something which is all about you have to be in your heart, because you can't do compassion, or you can do acts of compassion.
You can role play.
Yeah, and it can build from just habit. But you have to do anything that you're wanting to do in your life, you should do from your heart. Because as soon as you start doing things from your heart, then that thing becomes meaningful. So often people ask that question, what's your contribution in the world? And maybe we should be asking, well, how is your contribution in the world? With what attitude are you contributing? Because there's so many things that you can do in life, and one thing's not better than another necessarily, unless you're really doing it from your heart. It's not going to have the same impact, because as soon as you're in your heart, then the impacts are well beyond the local thing that you're doing. So, you could be doing something very specific with one person, but the impacts, the ripples from that could be huge if you're doing it in your heart. And that's, we've talked about the fact that you can measure that electromagnetic field from your heart. That's with the machines that can measure anything at the moment. I mean, the heart is, we're talking about something that has an unlimited capacity. So the more we can realise the importance of kind of holding that frequency. I can't remember if we talked about that idea last time, but Eckhart Tolle talks about this idea of the frequency holders in society, with people who choose to not follow the dominant paradigm, which is actually one where it's rolling us in as a society into a more stressful place, and they drop into a lower place where they're actually being less active. They might be sitting on a park bench, they might be just enjoying doing some gardening. That's actually really important for all of us. We might not even know that person's doing it, but it holds us all together because of that connectivity you're talking about.
But that sort of but for each of us, and I don't know where I am in that spectrum of people. I certainly feel that I can get the overwhelming momentum of busyness and activity and deadlines will sweep me. For sure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So for me, the concept of these people is beautiful. I'm probably not one of them for sure, right? But what I can do in my life is I can, when I recognise that I'm being swept along with momentum, is choose to stop. And one thing that you said earlier, that when you said recognize that you can't even feel grateful, right? Is part of that for me is actually accepting that I can't feel grateful, or accepting that you know that yes, I do feel angry, you know? And because for me, when I accept that I'm angry, that in itself is such a big step into allowing the anger to subside, allowing my heart to overwhelm with positive feelings those negative feelings that were there. You know, so
that's terrific you say that, because it really, for me, emphasises the fact that it's not about doing anything, because all you're really doing is saying, oh, I am angry. The acknowledgement of that anger then allows your heart to do its thing, which is the natural override. But unless we acknowledge it, we're inside the content, if you like, of, you know, that emotion. And that's the thing that's going to, you know, always continue that that snowball effect. So it's such a powerful turning point, that acceptance. You're right. It seems so simple and so little, but
but what is acceptance really when you think about it? You know, it's, I guess for me, it's like an acknowledgement that something's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to change it. I'm just going, oh, that's there.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I think it's quite profound in a sense, because when you accept it, you're accepting that you are the one feeling that. You're admitting actually that I am feeling angry. It's not like you've stopped projecting it out into the world out there and said, wow, I'm feeling angry. So in that moment, it can be properly dealt with, as opposed to what will happen if we think, oh, this problem's creating it. We can't allow it to shift because it's kind of not seen, but in our awareness of it being, oh, I'm feeling angry, then it can be worked upon.
Yeah, because you're right. I mean, if there's a big difference between accepting that something is happening, right, and actually accepting that it's you.
Yeah. Yes. That's right. What is my contribution to
so
this?
So you're actually owning the situation. As opposed to the alternative, which is sort of, I guess, the victim mentality we sort of alluded to a little bit before, where it's out there happening to me.
Yes, and it's so disempowering.
Very disempowering.
It's so disempowering. Therefore, you continue to wallow in it. What's so confronting in that moment of acceptance, which is the admission, is can it really be possible that this is me? That it's me actually causing this suffering? It's like the most important thing that we could perhaps do is to acknowledge that the suffering that we experience, at the end of the day, comes down to us, which is what concentration camp survivor Viktor Frankl realised in a moment of incredible suffering, was that he had that choice not to follow those emotions, but to actually say, what can I do about this right now? Well, I can acknowledge that that's the state and the place that I'm in right now. And in that, there was this incredible liberation that came, because he stopped defining his world by what others were doing or would do to him, and just thought, no, I can choose how I respond to what's happening. And that became amazingly liberating. Still stuck in a cell and a horrible
Feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, amazing.
But it's like that concept that, you know, that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional.
No, exactly, Where's that from? That's a great saying.
I think I saw it on one of those thing on Instagram, or it's just someone's really cool picture with that phrase in it.
That's right. There's so many profound things that kind of just whiz past you. Wow.
See, in the old days, it'd have those calendars where it'd have anonymous as the quote, but these days it's just about everything.
Yes.
So earlier today, you were sharing a story that actually, when you with me, this is before we were on air, where you were talking about compassion, and actually the themes that have just come through just right now in terms of acceptance, in terms of gratitude. You know, I'm going to actually ask you to share that story.
Yes. You're right. It does come together. It's amazing.
It's actually extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, it was amazing for me, because I was down at on the banks of the Yarra, down South Bank in Melbourne, and I was there one night. I think I'd just seen a film with some friends, and I was walking along that promenade, and there were various people who were, begging on the street. And there was one particular person who really took my eye. It was a young woman. I don't reckon she would have been anything more than about 14 or 15.
Wow.
And I looked at her and I thought, I think she's pregnant.
Wow.
And she was sitting there, kind of close to the grassy area, just on the roll of the bank of the river. And it was a warm night, and she had some of her belongings around her. And people were just walking past, backwards and forwards. She had a little sign that said, can you please help? I'm looking for a place to sleep tonight. And I watched her probably for about 5 minutes from maybe 100 metres away, and everybody was just going past, you know. And as you do, that thing of these people become just part of the background. And I was watching everybody else, and they were in their conversations, and maybe some people noticed but then chose not to because it was all too difficult once you start noticing that. And I made a conscious choice, and it actually took some kind of courage, bizarrely, for me to go over and talk to her, because I thought, what are my motivations for this? But I really could feel, it was from my heart, that I wanted to just connect with her, and I went over to her slowly, and I kind of just, I had some money, and I can't remember, it was, you know, it was a significant amount of money, because I thought she needs to get some accommodation. And I just crouched down beside her before I gave her the money, and I just asked her, so where do you think you might sleep tonight if you don't get a place to sleep? And she just looked at me, and the first thing I felt was this incredible calmness about her. And I'd noticed that she wasn't kind of like hunched up, and she was actually quite open, and she was looking at people as they were going past, and just kind of engaged. And she said, oh, me and the little one, she put a hand on her belly and she said, me and the little one will probably just go over there and be on the grass. I said, wow, that's very full on. And she looked at me with that look of, well, you know, that might be full on for you, that's my life, so I don't see it as full on, that's just what I do kind of thing. But she did say, you know, yeah, well, I do that quite often. And then I gave her the money, and because it wasn't, you know, just a gold coin donation kind of thing, she looked at me and she went, wow, thank you. And there was so much gratitude pouring from her heart that I just thought, who's the one who's actually receiving the gift in this moment, you know? For reaching out to her, I just felt like it was all the other way. And this kind of interesting kind of loop started happening in my head about, you know, what was going on there. And I continued to talk with her for a little bit, and I stepped away again, and I went back to where I was, you know, I said, good luck, and, you know, she was smiling by that time, and quite free, open, and, you know, comfortable. I went back and I watched her again, and then I saw the people going past her. And the interesting thing then was that the compassion that I thought initially I would reserve for someone in her position flipped over to the people walking past not seeing her. Because I thought, you know, going back to the heart, we're here to share. And there's an opportunity to connect to somebody. And for whatever reason, I had in that moment seen her, maybe because I just, you know, was pausing and I was looking around me, but I'd seen her, and in that connection with her, I felt so, you know, open-hearted. I felt like I'd received such a gift. And I looked at all these people and I thought, they're not getting that gift. And I felt deep compassion for them, actually, and I felt this incredible compassion for all of us in our various situations when we forget to stop and to look and to reach out to each other, because it's in that reaching out to each other that we find the meaning. But so often we don't, for whatever reason, because we don't want to look at that suffering, because it reminds us of, oh my God, I don't want to be there, and you know, that's just too difficult.
It's such a big situation, though. I mean, you got refugees from Syria, right, roaming across cities, you know, where you can go through places in Hungary these days, and you really can't walk down the pavement because you've got to step around people that are lying and sleeping. You know, you go to Melbourne, and you know, what is it? Is it economic? Is it an ice epidemic, I don't know, but there are homeless people living on the streets of Melbourne absolutely everywhere. And I find that for me, it's almost like part of me wants to be in a hurry, right? So I don't always stop, you know, and I don't stop enough, to be honest. Like sometimes I do. I always feel rewarded, but so another part of me feels like, do I not want to get trapped? You know, I might feel like I'm going to get, you know, I don't want to get drawn into this drama and then have to go find more. You know, I don't know like what it is, but when I do stop and connect, or even if it's not to give money, but just to have a conversation, sometimes. I'm continuously, you know, grateful I've done it, but part of me is also wondering, gee, was that just that I was lucky that person wasn't like a nutter, you know, like they didn't try to grab my laptop off me or something, you know? It's so shallow, what I'm saying. Like,
no, I mean, it's so true. It's and I think it's this leap of faith that we have to do. We have to take that risk and say, what is more important, that I get dragged into that thing, or that I have made that connection? And we're not always going to do that, because it's just the reality. We've got other things that we're doing. But I think even if we're conscious of the fact that that's what we're not doing in that moment, is stopping to reach out, it keeps us at least tuned in that that's what we should do, and it doesn't become normal for there to be all these people suffering around us and us not taking any notice of it. And you know, I think this going back to this, you know, going back to that burdensome feeling that we can so easily slip into, and sometimes it's just completely overwhelming. I think we've all got that responsibility to be aware of that in others and to be supporting other people when they're in that state, but also realising it's not your life situation that's necessarily going to make you feel happy, because often the burdens that we get locked into are around our expectations. If only I had this person, this house, this job,
which
this
is what the
situation.
Dalai Lama was saying,
right?
You know, wasn't it the same thing? Like, you know,
yes,
that because I want this, or I feel this. You know, the consequent negative emotions arise within you because of being fixed on something that's important to you and making that the priority. Challenge for the week, potentially, get out there and find someone to connect with. It doesn't need to be a homeless person. If you can't find one, just come to Melbourne. They're all over the place. But how beautiful if it was. And connect with someone from the heart in a compassionate way, just by being there, having a conversation. You know, or is it someone else in your own life? I don't know.
Absolutely. I think it's a great challenge, because if we give ourselves that challenge, I think it'll arrive. We'll see that moment. But it's like we need to remind ourselves, like in this moment, and go, okay, I'll take that on, and then it'll be there, sure enough, and we'll go, oh no, I asked myself for this challenge, how am I going to deal with this? Because of all those unconscious things we do to not notice.
And particularly, like if you're feeling overwhelmed, if you're feeling weighed down by things, if you're feeling stretched or stressed in life, you know, you're in a hurry, you're angry, whatever. Imagine stopping then. Right? Because those are the times when there's the concept of smelling the roses. You know, we're always too busy to stop and smell the roses, but actually stopping to give, stopping to connect, stopping to be compassionate. You know, to not go down the rabbit hole of grief and the trauma and the story of someone's pain and hardship, but just to be there and connect with them when you don't have the time. You know,
exactly.
Actually, when we've talked about a whole lot of things that people could do that would help shift feelings of being overwhelmed, burdened, whatever, and shift them to feeling happier, to feeling more joyful, to feeling calmer. And we've talked about things like acceptance and gratitude and you know, stopping and relaxing, you know, and doing the heart strengthening activity that we've done in previous episodes. Stopping and being compassionate with someone. You know, it's right up there, I think.
Absolutely. And these things that we do when we do that stopping it's for everyone. You know that straight away. As soon as you do it, you have to start with you because you're the receptacle within which your heart is, and you have to. Okay, I need to be able to. It's great for me because I'm in that space. Now I'm able to be of support to somebody else. I'm able to see somebody else who needs support instead of being consumed by my own worries and burdens. So, of course, we have to start at that point. If we don't start there, then it's much more tricky. But if we do start, okay, I need to do this thing, then, of course, we can kickstart ourselves out of that that place of, oh, no, what am I going to do? And say, wow, that was a surprise. I did something for someone else and it's actually making me feel much better.
Yeah. Without the motive of doing it to feel better.
Absolutely.
So the challenge is go be compassionate with someone in a heartfelt way, without any expectation of how that's going to make you feel, but observe. See what happens.
Nice.
What would be great would be to do that and then click on in fact, we haven't even talked about the show at all, but it's awesome. We love it if you can click on the link on the page to like the show, Two Guys Talk Heart on Facebook. If you like the show, you get to keep in touch with what's happening, and certainly what we love is your feedback, your questions, your advice, your suggestions. What should we talk about?
And you're sharing. I mean, if you take this challenge, go, wow, share it, because it's going to go with everybody who connects with that page. And that's how we actually learn, when people say, I tried that and this is what happened. It was a surprise. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stu.
Steve, it sort of feels like we're wrapping up again, doesn't it? I wonder if we're close to 41 or 42 minutes.
That's right.
It's been very funny. So this is the 4th episode of this series, and so far we've been, without looking at any clocks, there's no clocks, no watches, no phones, nothing. We have no concept of how long these episodes are going for. And they've all been within about 30 or 40 seconds duration.
That's amazing.
Now, Steve, you're off to the States. So, first Two Guys Talk Heart episodes beaming live from the US are going to be over the next few weeks. It's going to be very exciting. We've got a couple of people, hopefully, that we can get on the show to talk about different things to do with the heart in different areas. I'm going to be back in Australia, and I might weigh in with my observations, because I'm really looking forward to seeing what you talk about.
Well, there's some great work happening over there, as you know. So maybe next Friday, because that's when I'll be arriving. You can do whatever happens.
Well,
over
we'll
here
see what happens.
spontaneously.
We'll see what happens in the meantime. But Steve, it's been great.
Yeah,
I enjoyed this time of the week with you, and certainly sitting outside,
and the sun's
enjoying. This has been, for those of you that don't live in Melbourne, you may have noticed that the light, the shade, we've had sun, we've got sun now, we've had cloud. The forecast for today was rain and stormy. So this is classic. This is very common for this time of year in the city. In any case, Steve Ray and Stuart Hayes, Two Guys Talk Heart on Facebook Live every week. Reach out, like the show, stay tuned to what's happening, and share your experience. Thank you so much. We look forward to seeing you again very soon. Thank you.
See ya.
I'm going to get up and stop the episode now.